The morality of the left was on full display as a older woman, kind of heavy set in nature, as you'll see here in just a moment, went to her local Target, shoved her cart full of $1,000 worth of goods, and then demanded reparations. Now, as you'll see in the video, she accosted a cashier, then a manager, and then ran and tried to chase a young man who was with security and was then clocked in the face for her trouble. Again, I'll show that here in just a moment, but I posted this on social media with the great words of famous intellectual Thomas Sowell. What is your fair share of that which you did not work for? And of course, the left put their morality on full display for all of us to see. Before we get to that, I'll show you the clip here.
Okay, so I came around and I was like, hey, what can I do for you?
Okay.
She starts going on this spiel about like about how like I've had a privileged life and she's been disadvantaged, and then said that she was asking Target to make reparations for her. And I said, that's not something we can do tonight. If you need a donation, like, you can call tomorrow. I can put you in touch like, with the HR person, but like, that isn't something I can do for you like right now tonight.
Was she screaming at you, or?
Yeah. And like backing me up against the soda machine.
Okay.
And then that's when like our security heard. Yeah.
What were you asking her to do?
Reach out to her manager so we can have a larger discussion about how money works and how provision works and how it's been working in our community in a very wrong way.
Now, when I posted this clip and added Thomas Sowell's words, you would think that that might be humbling enough for most white liberals, especially young white liberal women, to kind of stop for a moment, think that they probably don't know what is best for black people, and to actually listen a little. However, it doesn't stop some people. And we had one person comment on the video and said this: okay, well, what about all the work put in by the elders? What about Black Wall Street? What about the racism preventing hardworking black families from getting mortgages and homes in nice communities in the last decade? She's speaking of redlining there, I suppose. I can understand why the black community is upset. And then when white people like this guy, speaking of me, think it's so black and white, which is a great, like, complete sentence. Anyway, their grandparents worked harder than your grandparents. How she would know that, who knows? And you reaped benefits from that, even if no generational wealth was passed down. Their communities are not theirs. The Asians run the small businesses in their communities, and this was no accident. Now, if you wonder who the real racists are anymore, I hope you can now see very clearly who they are, because when I reread this, I thought to myself, my God, I didn't even realize how racist this was, to sit there and blame Asians for taking over black businesses and the like. So needless to say, I hope we can be reminded, regardless of if you've been lied to about the great switch about the Democratic and the Republican Party and all that kind of stuff, and whether or not you believe that the Republican Party of old is actually the Democratic Party of the present. If you believe that nonsense, I've got some real estate I need to sell you. It's very expensive. But needless to say, regardless of what you think of that, hopefully we see over and over and over again the racism of the left coming out with ridiculous attacks, not only upon Asian communities, but also against me, marginalized white evangelical male Christian in society. Now, a couple of things about this. She brings up Black Wall Street and what about the racism preventing people from getting mortgages and all that kind of stuff in the past. And so reparations typically, by the way, is this idea that because of past systemic racism, there have been reverberations that have been felt in the present and have marginalized and disenfranchised specifically black people in the present. And now specifically, this is typically done with racism, right? Like historic racism in slavery specifically has created kind of that reverberation. And slavery is such a big deal, it creates a big reverberation, and it needs to be acknowledged in the present. Now here are white young liberal women coming to the defense of black people because they can't come to the defense for themselves, is kind of situating this more within the civil rights era. So let's just take that for granted, that civil rights era, kind of Black Wall Street, what happened there, and redlining, what happened there in black communities and all that kind of stuff. Let's just kind of look at that for a moment. So if we're going to take reparations seriously, which you wouldn't do if you listen to the girls on The View, but you actually want to have a thoughtful conversation about this kind of stuff. You certainly wouldn't kind of throw racist remarks about Asians in there, and you wouldn't, throw around ad hominem attacks. You wouldn't want to do those things, because you would want to focus on what reparations really is about and how difficult it actually is to kind of evaluate who needs reparations. So do you give it to all black people, even if they migrated from Africa like 5 years ago and didn't necessarily come from a place that was impacted at all by the transatlantic slave trade? I mean, when we talk about an African American anyway, what are we even talking about? Because, Elon Musk is an African American, now that I think about it, but I don't think I've ever heard him called that. And should we give reparations to him? So the idea here is, how do we truly factor who gets the reparations? Now, most people say, well, we need to focus on those who have been disenfranchised and marginalized. Now, in order to do that, here's what you would have to do. You would have to be able to have a metric by which you could judge how these individuals were impacted specifically by historic systemic racism. So you would have to know that some of what they're experiencing in the present is as a direct result of some of the things that took place in the civil rights movement, or as a direct result of historic racism. Because fact check, the black young man or woman in the present who wasn't alive during the civil rights era and wasn't alive during slavery days cannot necessarily claim that they've been directly impacted in the way that their probably great-grandparents were, right? Because if you want to give reparations to those people who legitimately were disenfranchised and marginalized, you would give it to the people who were directly affected. But now we're moving down the line, not only 2 generations, 3 generations at the very least, and probably more, to see who was truly impacted from historic racism in America. So you would have to know how people are impacted by those past events in the present to truly be able to assess who gets what. Moreover, you would also have to put in another metric that I think is incredibly important that very few people want to talk about. You would have to put in the metric of personal responsibility. In what way are the decisions that you've made in the present the reason that you might be experiencing marginalization? In other words, did you graduate high school? Did you have a child out of wedlock? Did you go to college? Did you finish college? And then did you pursue a career in that field? Because the people who are willing to do all of the things that I just named are highly likely, regardless of race, to succeed in America. Not to mention that there is upward mobility regardless of the generational wealth that you were brought into this world and experienced. All of these things are objective facts, so what we have to do is meet the cry for reparations with objective facts so that we can understand who gets what and how much. So how much of the pains that you're experiencing are as a direct result of your own personal decision making. But I've got a better suggestion, and this is going to probably be the first and last time I quote Andrew Tate, but he's not wrong here. He says this in a podcast about black and white billionaires.
When a black billionaire meets a white billionaire, do you think there's any racism? Do you think they care? He's a billionaire, I'm a billionaire. Both our yachts are in Monaco. He's from Algeria, he stole all the gold. I'm a stock market whatever. There's no racism. The racism's for the poor people. Because if you keep the poor people divided, they can't wake up long enough to do what I did and read about how money works. Because if they do that, we got big trouble, right? Then the slaves will wake up. You don't want to deprogram the slaves. So you have to convince the slaves that it's not the monetary system's fault that you're broke. It's not the monetary system's fault that you continue to work for a set number of dollars and the price of houses just keep going up and up and up. It's not the monetary system's fault. It's the white man's fault, or the black man's fault, or the Asian people's fault. Someone else's fault. I think all this stuff, feminism, racism, all these things, I think they're all control mechanisms. They have to keep the poor people fighting amongst each other, because if the poor people all unite, then it's much harder to control us.
Thank you, Andrew Tate. This is how crazy our world's gotten. This tattooed kickboxer or whatever he was makes more sense than most people in our political elitist class. So perhaps we don't need to be talking about reparations at all, because perhaps racism in that narrative is nothing more than a divisive attempt to get us at each other's throats so that we don't actually look to our overlords who want to constantly busy us with these kind of things and keep us fighting for scraps so that we don't actually take personal responsibility for our own finances and learn how money works. Because if we're divided fighting amongst ourselves, we're too busy to actually focus on the things that can bring us into prosperity in the present. Because it truly is inarguable that if we're going to truly better ourselves, America is the best place for you to be able to do that, regardless of your race. But there's one further point here. Andrew Tate is encouraging us to escape the matrix that has been created for us by our political overlords and by those who are in elite classes, by saying the black billionaire and the white billionaire aren't having conversations about historic racism. They're enjoying their wealth and living in the lap of luxury and taking advantage of the fact that they're not worried about those nonsense things that keep them from personal responsibility. So they've escaped the matrix, but have they? Because there's another matrix waiting for you on the other side of the peasant matrix, which is the materialism matrix. Is material wealth and goods ultimately going to truly fulfill the heart of a man or a woman? And I think we have to realize that there are matrices everywhere, to follow the analogy to its fullest extent. Thankfully, not Keanu Reeves movies everywhere, although I like John Wick. But there are matrices everywhere, and so I really think it's fair to suggest that as much as we talk about escaping the matrix and thinking for ourselves, we do want to do those things, and we want to be red-pilled, as it were, and be God-based. But the truth is that no matter where you are in life, you're going to be in a matrix, or if you want to put it this way, you're going to be operating under a worldview. See, the person who thinks they've thrown off the shackles of Christian fundamentalism and Christian evangelicalism in America, and they think for themselves now, actually are just merely operating under the principles of secular humanism. So congratulations, you've graduated one matrix so that you can move on to the next. And so the real question is this: if we're not really escaping the matrix, but jumping from matrix to matrix, which matrix do you want to live in, and do you want to go to? And which matrix has proven itself throughout history, regardless of what some of the people within that matrix have done, has proven itself throughout history to actually be beneficial to you and to society as a whole? And I would argue that matrix is the matrix of Scripture and Christian ethics and values. Ultimately, if you lived your life that way, even if you didn't believe in the God who proposed these ideas, you would benefit yourself far greater than any other matrix in society. At the end of the day, I would encourage you to realize that the wager that you're going to make with this life really matters. And if you're going to put your faith in something, you better put it in something outside of yourself, in a much more grander morality that can help us come together, rather than the morality that we're constantly hearing about from the left. That is not only mentally, but spiritually bankrupt. If you want to elevate that matrix, I heartily encourage you toward a Christian matrix. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And most importantly, go with God. So you just got done watching a small excerpt of a much larger episode. You can find the link to that full episode down below in the description of this video. So you definitely want to check that out, because if you like that clip, you'll like the much larger episode. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click that little bell to be notified when great new episodes of Indie Thinker come your way. Thanks for watching.